because they're sick, etc., we need to make sure we make a recording available. So we're here for HAS941 Workshop 2, Introduction to Methods and Methodology. Some of this you should have covered in the modules that you across the week. Which side are you seeing? Are you seeing like you're seeing the screen with the little bits down the bottom, aren't you? Or are you seeing it just as a full screen?
We're seeing your presentation.
Everything.
You're seeing everything. That's what I've just realized. So I've shared the wrong thing. Give me one sec, guys. You think I should know how to do this by now? Right, now you can see just the PowerPoint. Lovely, thank you. So just a reminder, we are actually sharing this. And we do ask, unless there is some technical, like some internet difficulties, which we know do happen, that you do keep your cameras on, particularly doing group work, because ideally we would love to be face-to-face, but with an international cohort, as well as people from WA, we can't be face-to-face, but at least we can see people's faces. Yeah. So before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge that this country that we're on here, at least for me and those that are in Wollongong, we're on Dharawal country of the Wadi Wadi people, but the university's footprint extends well beyond that. So we want to acknowledge that country for Aboriginal peoples is an interconnected set of ancient and sophisticated relationships. The University of Wollongong spreads across many interrelated Aboriginal countries that are bound by this sacred landscape and intimate relationships with the landscape since creation. From Sydney to the Southern Highlands to South Coast, from freshwater to bitter water to salt, from city to urban to rural. The University of Wollongong acknowledges the custodianship of the Aboriginal peoples of this place and space that has kept alive the relationships between all living things. The university acknowledges the devastating impact of colonisation on our campus's footprint and commit ourselves to the truth-telling, healing and education. So everyone in Australia is on an Aboriginal country, whether you're on Dharawal country or not. And for those of you that are overseas, you may also be on Indigenous country. So I just want to acknowledge that this was always Aboriginal country, always will be, and our sovereignty has never been ceded. And as an Aboriginal woman, this is something that I'm really passionate about, as you know. So congratulations from completing assessment 1 for those of you that have submitted it. There's been a large number of extensions required for people that have been sick. Really great work for those that posted in week 3, critical reflection. Now, I have to say, we did only get a small number of people posting in the critical reflection. Guys, that is your opportunity to get really concise, really specific feedback from me. So if you're actually going to continue with this subject, because obviously census data is coming up, I highly encourage you to make use of the opportunities that we create for you, in particular, the critical reflection for assessments 3 and assessments 4. For those that actually did put in the critical for reflection, it was really great to see what you had done to date and your thought processes. So, and for me to be able to give you some advice and some tips on maybe how to extend that or to improve what you had done. Does anyone not know what I mean by critical reflection? Like the critical reflection forum. No shame if you don't, like, speak up, because if you don't know about it, that would be disappointing that you're not able to use that opportunity. No, you all know about it. Fantastic. So just a couple of reminders. This subject, I'm going to just say a few things. This subject is not an easy subject. This subject requires you to actually do a lot of self-directed learning, which may be new for some of you. And basically, as it says on here, you get out as much as you put in. You can't wing this subject. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I'm one of these students, when I was a student, that would wing certain subjects because you could. If it was like the 3rd time you'd done something and it was, but this is a subject where you actually absolutely need to do the modules. We really need you, this is a master's course, so we really need you to understand that this is you got to self-manage the timely completion of modules to allow you then to do the assessments. All of the modules are actually giving you information that helps you do the assessments. And we can see that in Moodle, not everyone is accessing the modules on time. Look, we know life gets in the way. And I'm not actually, like, if you've had some life experiences that have gotten in the way, I absolutely appreciate that. But you need to remember that unless they're significant life experiences, such as a death in the family or ill health, we actually can't give you extensions because you haven't done the work. It's just not reasonable or feasible when we've got 120 something students. We really try to create enough opportunities for you to really get across the material for this subject, which includes this workshop, the drop-in session. So I'll be taking the drop-in session from 4:30 to 5:30 on Tuesday. Please come to that if you've got any questions about the subject material. That's not an opportunity to ask particular questions about your assessments, though. That's an opportunity to ask about the course material or more general questions about the assessments. Use the critical reflections, as I said, engage with the Moodle forums. That's really an opportunity to engage with your teachers and peers. And, you know, if you miss these workshops, watch the recordings online. It's really important that you do as much as the work as possible. As I said, this is not a subject you can wing. We also have 120 plus students in this. We cannot make allowances for individual students because you haven't done the work. That's not reasonable or feasible. And it's not fair to your other students. We want to make sure that everyone has the opportunities and everyone has the same opportunities. But again, if there's a death in the family or there's someone sick, please put in an AC. Don't email us directly. If you meet the AC criteria, we will, of course, give you an extension. Does anyone have any comments or questions about that? No, okay. I love research. I'm really passionate about research. And I'm really hoping that even if none of you become researchers or only some of you become researchers, that what it does is help you think critically about research, that it informs your practice, whatever you're doing, whether it's OH&S, public health, or social work. Because honestly, even if you're not in research, you need to be able to look at the research that's published in your space and be able to critique it. So this subject will give you skills to be able to determine good research from bad research. And quite frankly, even if it's peer reviewed, there's still good research and bad research, or there's better research than other pieces of research. So please, please, please understand that this is really vital, regardless of whether or not you're going to be a researcher, because it'll make you a better practitioner. Okay, lecture over. Sorry, guys. We'll get to the content. I just really wanted to reinforce that for week 2 because I really want to make sure that you get the best out of this subject and that you pass. And the best way of passing is to be doing the material and maximizing your opportunities. So talking about methodologies and methods. So we're just going to have a bit of a chat about this. So I'm going to get you guys to talk to me for a little bit because I've just been speaking to you. When I say the words research methods, what does that make you think about?
The ways in which we go about researching a subject or a topic.
Sure. Can you give me an example?
Going to the library and
Yeah.
looking at books.
Yep. Has anyone else got any other examples that they can think about?
I think of a lit review because it's usually the only type of research I'm doing.
Yeah, fair enough. That is, lit reviews are vital to research, absolutely vital, which is probably why they're in a number of your subjects. Anyone else think of any other methods?
Like interview groups.
Perfect. That is exactly. So we're going to cover a couple more, but that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. So what about methodology? What's methodology then? If methods is the tools that we're using, such as interviews and lit reviews, what's methodology? Stephanie?
The way in which you're going to apply those methods. So, you know, whether you're going to do a certain percentage of group, you know, over what time period, just sort of the way you're actually going to apply it.
So that, strictly speaking, is still methods. Anyone else want to have a crack? And I'll tell you why in a second, Stephanie. There's often a lot of confusion between methods and methodology. So this is why we put it up here.
methodology
methods
be?
used in particular area or any activities?
Sorry, Kathia, those, could you say that again for me?
It's the methods used in a particular area or any activity.
Yeah. And what about methodology? Any thoughts? Abhinav, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe methodology are the parameters around which we go about doing that research.
So it's kind of the parameters, but this is always tricky. And to be honest with you, there's some researchers that still get this wrong. So this methodology is about the theories that we use to underpin our research. So it will actually help us put those parameters around the research and also consider what methods are appropriate. So I'm a pragmatist, and I use a pragmatic approach to research, which means that I believe that the methods should actually align with whatever the work that I'm doing, whatever's best practice for the work that I'm doing. So it's about the theory. So when we're talking about, for example, so I use multiple theories when I'm doing work. So there's Indigenous methodologies, which is underpinned by Indigenous ways of doing things. So the theories are from an Indigenous lens. So there's a whole bunch of theories which we won't necessarily cover in this subject, but it's really important for you to remember that the way we do research is often underpinned by the methodology, and often the methodology we pick is aligned with our positionality or our standpoint, whichever one you actually use. I know social workers use positionality, and in public health we talk about standpoint and positionality as well. And so, you know, you've got the positivist approach, which is something that I personally don't align with, which is a belief that people can be objectives and through and knowledge can be perceived and understood by actually going out and doing the research. So it's a belief that anyone can actually do anything if they're actually doing the right methods. I'm a really big believer in that there needs to be lived experience in the work that you do, and that and I'll give you an example. This is why I don't believe in the positivist approach. I believe that as a woman, when my dad had prostate cancer, I could empathize with him about, so he had to decide whether he was going to do surgery, he was going to do, you know, radiation or do nothing. And by the way, he's fine, which is why I'm comfortable talking about it. It's one of the most treatable cancers in the world. If you're going to get cancer, prostate cancer is the one you want, apparently. I could empathize with him, but I couldn't necessarily, as a woman, understand what he was going through emotionally when it was having to make decisions. So therefore, when you interpret data, you have to be really careful if you actually don't come from that group, to make sure that you're actually checking in with people that are actually from that group. So as an Aboriginal woman, I work with non-Aboriginal people in research, but they constantly check in with the Aboriginal people to make sure that they're not putting their worldview, their lens. So the methodology that you pick will depend on your positionality and your standpoint, and your research methods will then be influenced by that. So everyone might do interviews, for example, but say the realist approach, which is a realist methodology, a realist evaluation, they're really rigid in the way they believe the interview guidelines should be done. So they have really specific questions that are asked. So it's a structured interview rather than, say, a semi-structured interview, which allows you to ask further questions to support to support whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense? I'm trying to explain it. Have I explained it adequately? Any questions? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going. So I've just jumped it. Yeah. So qualitative versus quantitative methodology. So when I say qualitative, if we're talking about qualitative research, what kind of research is that? Don't be
I think
shy.
it's like more of a interview type of research. It's a smaller sample than quantitative research, and you are going to interview in depth of your samples, and you are trying to get most of their worldview and what they think about the issue, and you are not going to do it with multiple choice, for example. And the best example I can think is ethnographic research in qualitative research. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that was Ricky. Can't see the screen just because this is up. Fantastic. When I say quantitative, does anyone want to jump in on quantitative and give me thoughts on that and an example?
Could that be done with a larger sample base, just getting more kind of like scalable questions, like 1 to 10, but like a larger pool of people for specific questions?
Yep. So 1 to 10, by the way, is called a Likert scale. That's awesome. Love that you know that. They're really useful quantitative methodology, and it's quantitative is about the numbers. So it's basically anything that you can count. So as you said, anything that you can measure and count like that. So quantitative is the numbers, and qualitative is, it can be anything. You could actually do an analysis of photos. You can do analysis of words. You can do analysis. So we're going to just, here we go. So quantitative, as I said, it's stuff that can be counted and qualified. So for example, describe the extent and distribution of a health problem. So if you're going to describe the extent of type 2 diabetes in amongst refugees in Australia, it would be, what's the extent of the problem and the distribution? So what is it amongst particular age groups? Is it amongst particular genders, etc.? And explain association of variable factors in relation to outcomes. So that might be, what is the health impact of being exposed to a particular chemical, for example? And what health outcomes does that have, that bring with it? The qualitative approach is focused on detail and understanding the meaning of a phenomena. So it's about the why, big on the why. And we then, as researchers, interpret the events and describe meaning and describe the meaning of that. And there's multiple ways you do that. So it explores lived experiences, emotions, behaviors, and it also looks to describe complex social interactions or cultural phenomena. Then there's mixed methods. Now, I'm strictly speaking, probably, I'm a mixed methods researcher with a heavier focus on qualitative. What that means is that you're actually going to do the quant and the qual. And there's two ways you can do this. Sometimes, for example, you might want to describe the extent and the distribution of a health problem, say type 2 diabetes amongst refugees, because then you want to understand how to actually get people to manage their diabetes and how to reduce the likelihood of future generations having diabetes. So we can then do the quant, which will tell us what the problem is and look at maybe who we need to talk to. It might be that we find more men, for example, in a certain age group are more likely to have type 2 diabetes. Then we can go to the qual and do some interviews to ask, well, why is this? How has this come about? We might want to understand their diet, their exercise, whatever it is. So we can then provide programs to help people manage their diabetes and reduce the likelihood of other people in that cohort developing type 2 diabetes. So that's a mixed method. So that actually is a bigger continuum. And it tends to be when you've got a bigger project and more money, usually, but it doesn't have to be. But you could also do it the other way. So in my PhD, I did a predominantly qual studies. I did couple of different studies within my PhD. So I did interviews as part of case studies to understand the impact of the National Key Performance Indicators on Aboriginal services. So I interviewed people at Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Services to understand what had happened since the introduction of this policy and how that had impacted their service delivery. Then what I did was actually did a separate set of interviews with people who had created the policy to understand what its intention was and then see whether or not its impact aligned with the intention. Then what I did, because I could only do a small number of interviews because they're time intensive, I created a quantitative survey which had Likert scales in it, which is the 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, not at all likely to extremely likely, for example, to then test amongst a bigger population whether the findings of my qual study was actually more generalizable across all of the ACCHOs across Australia. So with the case studies, I only did 5 Aboriginal organisations with 30 interviews. But when I did the survey, I could actually put the survey out to all 240 Aboriginal community controlled health services. So I could do a bigger sample, and I was testing the generalizability of my findings. So how do people feel about that? Do you think you've got the base understanding of that? Any questions or comments? No. Okay. So we talked about this before, so I won't labour this point. So methods are the techniques or approaches we use to collect our information. And, you know, there's lots of methods that can actually be used. So what we really need to know when we're thinking about our methods is, what is it we're trying to answer? Because the question that we're asking actually determines what kind of tools are going to be appropriate to answer the questions that we're asking. So is it descriptive, explanatory, causal, which by the way is really hard to determine? Then you've also got to think about what's appropriate for the population being researched. For example, telephone surveys, right? Where we might want to use telephone surveys might not necessarily be appropriate if a family only has one phone between them, so a mobile phone, and you're trying to target a particular people's. Or it might be that, for example, you're wanting to work with people who have disabilities and a range of disabilities. So actually mobility might be a problem. So meeting face-to-face might not be great. So you might want to do an online interview. So your methodology is influenced by the population, which is something you need to think about, and also by the ethics as well. So you really need to be thinking about ethics when you're doing your methodology, because as I said in the last one, it would be completely and utterly inappropriate to do a trial on pregnant women to see if alcohol impacts the fetus. Completely and utterly inappropriate. But what you could do is a retrospective study where you interview people and ask them to self-recall how much alcohol they drank during pregnancy, and then look to see whether or not their children are exhibiting signs of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So you could do a retrospective study. But each type of method comes with strengths and limitations. So for example, the only way you could do that is actually doing a say, for example, a retrospective study, but you're asking people to self-recall. When you're asking people to self-recall, they may feel uncomfortable, to be completely honest, or they actually might have dodgy memories. All of us actually have dodgy memories, let's be honest. So we do the best we can. So it's not about people being misleading. And also it's then dictated by the methodology. So when you're with your research question and moving into assessments 3 and 4, really thinking about the research topic of interest and thinking about what methods are going to be best suited for you, your study, and also your population. So just going to run through some basic methods. You've got a structured, semi-structured observation. So a structured observation, so it's when you're actually observing the population of interest. So this might be you're looking at how children interact with a new activity to see whether or not it increases their development around something. So you would sit there and observe the child. Limitation of this one is that the mere fact that people are often being observed changes people's behaviour. And sometimes it's unethical to actually observe. So for example, I'm a chair of an ethics committee. We got an application in for an observation study to look at, they wanted to observe nurses actually using a checklist to see if someone had actually been in a domestic violence situation. So to observe that study is completely unethical, because when you've got someone who's potentially a victim of domestic violence, they don't need a random researcher to sit there and participate in that. A questionnaire, which requires respondents to work through and complete a questionnaire, mostly on their own. It's paper or electronic, and that might be, this is often used with market research, so they're actually wanting to test products. Can you please watch this video and then tell me what you think the key message is? Opinion poll. We see all these all the time, particularly in relation to politics. A survey about people's opinions and perceptions on a subject matter. So for example, there might be opinion polls out soon on Scott Morrison's decision to take on the ministerial positions of 5 of his colleagues, and without telling most of them. So there may be a political opinion poll on that to see whether or not Scott Morrison's position in government's tenable and the Liberal Party should get rid of him. They're not, I don't know if they're going to do that, probably not, but that would be an example of an opinion poll. Then you've got randomized control trials. I'm going to say something about this. Randomized control trials are often held up as the pinnacle of research. So they are the best practice research. Now, not everything is possible to do an RCT. So an RCT is where it can be what's called a blind or double blind. So a blind is when the participant doesn't know which group they're in, either the control group or the intervention group, or it could be a double blind where the researcher doesn't know who's in what. So they have an independent person allocating people to the control group, which is usually the standard intervention. So let's say there's a new thing that they're looking to trial that replaces paracetamol. So the standard intervention would be paracetamol given 500 milligrams of paracetamol every 6 hours versus a new intervention, which they're going to trial. And then they're going to compare the differences to see whether or not there is a significant enough difference to warrant introducing this new drug to the market. But you could not do, for example, an RCT with a social marketing campaign that is going to be run through social media. So let's say a quit smoking campaign, because finding someone who has no access to the internet ever in the whole world who is smoking is probably going to be extremely challenging. So an RCT would not be appropriate for that. And you might actually want to do a questionnaire or an opinion poll instead. And then there's a review of clinical and administrative records. So this, by the way, are all quantitative data collection methods. So you might want to have a look, for example, do a retrospective with the clinic or administrative review. You might want to actually look at a retrospective study of patients who had received a particular brief intervention, let's say for smoking again. It's recorded on their patient management systems, and you want to see whether or not those people that have actually had a brief intervention have ended up actually quit smoking or used, say, nicotine replacement therapy. So you'd go through all the files of people in a cohort of, say, a 2-year period to see whether or not a brief intervention occurred, and if those people then tried NRT and ended up quit smoking. So that would be a clinical review. Any questions or comments on that? Nope, you guys are quiet today. So now you don't get to be quiet. You're in a busy suburban shopping mall in Australia. I want you to think about what methods you might use. And you want to conduct a study about compliance to social distancing regulations, that 1.5 meters that we all know we've been hearing about, we're probably overhearing about. If you were to do a quantitative observation method, what kind of data do you think you'd be recording?
The number of observed breaches.
Yeah, cool. Anyone else?
Sorry, and then you'd need to understand like the total population as like a baseline.
Yeah. Anyone else? I'm going to sit here till someone says something else.
I'm trying to think about if you were trying to make observations around like age or perceived gender or perceived race or any of that kind of demographic stuff, really, like how you would, whether you could then distill that down to something that was quantifiable, or if that was all just kind of in the observation, unless you were like, and then if you're not actually asking the people, like how do you identify? So I'm just trying to think through that and trying to see whether any of that stuff would be quantifiable knowledge.
Absolutely. So demographic stuff is something you would be looking at. And again, we talked about limitations. So you've really identified, for example, some limitations because it is about perception of gender, of age. You know, you might want to actually have a look at Is there a difference between people presenting as male versus female? Is there a difference in people who would be under 30, for example, versus over 30? So if you're looking at age, for example, you wouldn't have, so if you're doing the census data, they often break it up into 5 years because they've got a really large data pool, and also they know how old we are based on the census. But if you're guessing it, you might want to say teenagers versus young adults, and you might break it up that way, versus elderly people or middle-aged. So you might have broader cohorts of people, recognizing there will be some errors in that. But that's really good. That's the kind of data that you'd really want to do, because then you can actually start, when you do quantitative data analysis, you're often actually wanting to compare things. So is there a difference in age groups? Is there a difference? Because you might find that, and then you want to think about, why is this? And then you go and do the qual study, which is what we're going to talk about next. So, and these are not exhaustive, by the way, in terms of your methodologies. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on that before I move on? Ben, I notice you're not muted.
Sorry, no, all good.
Oh no, okay, that's all right. Anyone else?
Can I ask a question?
Of course, this is what we're here for.
Sorry, and it might be strange, but could you gather the quantitative observation data by doing like a social experiment, if you will? Like, say you set up, in a shopping center, and then you place yourself in a 1.5 meter box, not wearing a mask, and then ask people to come shake your hand, and it's 2020 during the height of the pandemic, and you could record that data saying, 30 people came and shook my hand, they were of this observed age, and this kind of particular gender. Is that considered that kind of quantitative observation method, or like, it's not traditional at all? I'm just trying to kind of grasp the concept.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call that observational. So that is a study that you could do. You put yourself at high risk of COVID just quietly, so it probably is not hugely ethical. But if we ignore the ethics of it, it's definitely quantifiable. So it is a quantitative study. So these studies are not, but that would probably be what I would call an intervention or experimental type approach.
Yeah.
So yes, it is absolutely a quantitative study. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
And look, there are studies that do things like that. For example, the study around marshmallows, where if you put a child in front of a marshmallow and say, I'm going to be back soon. If you don't eat the marshmallow, I'm going to give you 2 marshmallows. And so that's an intervention experiment. That's an experiment type study to see how long children can hold out for, and so they do things like that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
That's all right. And then part of that might be observation. So you're doing the intervention, and then you might actually sit behind a glass watching the child, kind of going, oh, I want that, I want that, I want that, but holding out. So it might be a combined method that way. Any other questions or comments? By the way, there's no question you can't ask me. Doesn't matter if you think it's a silly question or an unusual question. I'd rather hear it than not hear it. Nicole?
I was just wondering, just say you were doing like a survey, like on I suppose, I think I'm answering to myself now. If it was a survey like with a scale only, that would be like, your results would be like quantitative.
Yep.
Is that right?
That is
but
absolutely
if it was
right.
a survey, sorry?
I said that's absolutely right. It's quantitative.
But if there was also an opportunity for people to provide a comment, so you had both aspects to your survey, that's quantitative and qualitative?
It is, absolutely, and that's fantastic, yes. So that would be what I'd call a mixed method survey. So there is some crossover between the 2 types of methods. So some can be used in qualitative and a quantitative way. So that's a perfect example, actually, Nicole. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. So qualitative, my favorite, ethnographic, which I think, or as you identified earlier, which is great. It's where you...
It was Ricky, sorry.
Oh, Ricky, sorry, I'm attributing, my apologies. I'm stealing ideas from one person to another. Apologies for that. So it's an observation study. So this is a different type of observation. So rather than say counting, what you're doing is really considering the cultural settings. And that's kind of what I did with my case study. So I went into a service and I probably only did 10 interviews at max, but I sat within a service to look at how it feels and operates. And I made some observations about that. And so you might sit there. Anthropologists often use this type of approach. So they're going, you know, I struggle with anthropologists at times, but let's say they find this new tribe in Brazil and they decide to go and sit with them for, you know, months on end. And they want to actually see how the culture, so you're making assumptions about some of the cultural practices. And again, you might want to observe children at a playground. How do children at a playground actually negotiate sharing at the age of 4, for example? So you put a soccer ball in there and you also put a football in there and you watch them actually negotiate. And so you're making observations about that. So that would be qualitative, because you're not counting how many times they touch the football or how many children actually have the football. You're observing how they negotiate the use and the sharing of that football and the soccer ball. I have to say, I'd probably get in trouble with my mother. A round ball is the real football, she would say. Yeah, so for those of you who like real football, she would say, I apologize for that description. Interviews, you've got unstructured and structured. So you've got semi-structured, it should also be in there, apologies for that. So a structured is where you have a set of questions and you ask them in a linear fashion and you don't deviate from that. You respond to it and that's it. Semi-structured is where I have a guide for some questions. So I might say things like, tell me about your experience undertaking the Master of Public Health at the University of Wollongong. And then I'll be like, oh, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about that? And that second part is where it's the semi-structured, because I can go, all right, so what challenges have you found, or, you know, etc. And then the unstructured is really where you're aiming for a certain, you're aiming for an overarching theme. So I could go back to UOW thing. I could ask that question in terms of, you know, I want to understand your experience at UOW. And let's just let you talk. And I would actually ask questions all the way through, but I would only have one question right at the beginning to get the ball rolling. I want to understand your experience. Tell me about it. Whereas the semi-structured, I would then have some other questions and then look to explore it by asking you additional questions as we go along. Oral history and life interviews is up there as well. These are largely unstructured interviews where people are recalling events. These are really useful if you're talking to, you know, if you're, say, in social work and you really want to understand how someone's gotten to where they are, and or the MPH, if you're trying to understand, anyone who's doing Master of Public Health, really want to understand, say, what are people's experiences been with the medical system before coming to Australia, so you can understand why they're not accessing medical care here in Australia if we're looking at refugees. Focus group, it's where we have a large group of people. When I say large, it's often between 6 and 15. More than 15 gets a bit challenging. I did have 30 people turn up to a focus group once. That was challenging, let me tell you, but you can make it work. And you basically got a set of questions and you're wanting to explore it, and you're wanting, part of the reason you do a focus group is because you want people to bounce off each other. You want to hear the differences. You want people to discuss it and say, oh, that's not been my experience. My experience has been X, Y, and Z. Or, oh, I didn't think about that. You're right. That actually was something that really is something I experienced. Any questions or comments about the qual stuff we've just gone through? No? Okay. So same as before, want to hear from you. You're in a busy suburban shopping mall at the height of the pandemic in July 2020. For those of you who are in Australia, that was when we had our first lockdown in New South Wales, at least. I don't know about the rest, probably Victoria too. You had a lockdown every other day. If you were to use a qualitative method, a qualitative observation method, talk to me about what kind of information you might be collecting. Do we need to get your coffees before we come to class?
Would it just like collecting people's, like just collecting comments from people about particular things?
It's an observation method. So yes, you could do that, absolutely. But if we're looking at observation specifically.
Oh, just observation, right? Okay.
Yeah. But yes, you're answering the second question on there. So just pretend you're answering that one and you're absolutely correct. But if it's just observation, what are we collecting? We kind of answered it last time, to be honest, guys.
Whether people were adhering to the rules or not, whether they were keeping socially distant and that. You wouldn't necessarily speak to people because you're just observing, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
So can I give you an example? You might, one of the observations might be is that adults, so I'm going to say people over the age of 18 or who present as over the age of 18, because we know some young people or vice versa look older or younger. They socially distance with other adults, but not with children, for example. So you might actually be observing the characteristics of when people are actually keeping to the regulations versus when they're not. So you also might be thinking about another observation might be that young people who do not have headphones in are actually more likely to sit physically distance than those that do. And the assumption could be made that, you know, because they're not hearing anything outside of the music or the podcast they're listening to, they're not able to actually recognize when someone's close, because you might hear someone behind you and take a step forward, but if you can't hear them, you might not be. So I think that's a silly example, but that kind of gives you an idea of the things that you might be observing. You might observe that women with children are more likely to physically distance and get their children to physically distance because they're worried about their children's health, whereas those without children in the shopping centre are not as worried about their own health as, you know. So any comments or questions on that? No. If you're doing, sorry?
Can I make a comment?
Sure, go for gold.
Yeah, I just feel like for the ethnographic observation, I would think it's more about like a participatory knowledge rather than representational knowledge. So if we are doing a research on the shopping mall, it's more like, if it's up to me, I would think it's more like about actually immerse yourself in that scenario. You want to ask people about their experience, their like individual experience of living under the social distancing regulations and what's going on in that particular location during pandemic, instead of just like observing, because I think there is a huge gap between like just observation and making assumptions and conclusions that certain group of population are doing certain things because of something. Because I just feel like it's a little bit like over like it's a little bit how to say, like over generalization, because sometimes there's one participant of your observation who may have no awareness of your existence. They do certain things and they just go along their days for their particular reasons, but you may just draw a very distinct conclusion from like that specific behavior. Does that make sense?
absolutely makes sense and couldn't agree with you more. So if you are a positive, if you prescribe to the positivist approach methodology, you would make the assumption that you were able to reason and logically make assumptions about people's behavior or whatever it is. So that methodology in particular would disagree with you. I personally don't ascribe to that. So therefore, I absolutely agree with you. If you're going to make observations, I would do observations and then I would go back and I would check my knowledge against doing interviews, etc. So when I sat within health services, for example, around the NKPIs, and I sat in meetings and I was observing, I would note things like most of the conversations around the national key performance indicators were actually about the reporting of them rather than the using of the indicators. Is that assumption correct? And they'll be like, oh, no, that was just the focus of this particular meeting because we have a reporting coming up, so we need to report it. Outside of that, we actually then think about how we can use them in-house. So it was more, so I absolutely agree with you. So it depends on where you align with your methodology and your philosophy of research. So I would never do an observation like this without actually, I might do an observation. The only time I would do an observation is if if it's an emerging topic and I know nothing about it, right? We might actually do an observation to get a sense of generally what's happening as a bit of a scoping pilot kind of thing. And then from that observation, we might then create a new research project that really does the specific stuff that you were talking about. So that's the only time, is if brand spanking new, nothing in the whole world has ever been known about this. We'll do a little bit of an observation because we can't actually do a research project that does everything because we have limited time and money. So yeah, absolutely agree with you. Thank you for raising that. And I really think that was important for you to raise. And it kind of goes to what my interviews or focus group methods, if you add that to the observation raise. So I won't go into that one. Any other final comments or questions? No. Right. So we're going to do an activity. So going to do breakout rooms for 20 minutes. I think I'm actually running well over time. I probably talked too much. So I'll go back. On Moodle, I hope you all have access to Moodle. There is a folder under workshop 2 that says workshop 2 resources. There is an activity 1, mapping methods to research questions. So if you can open that, that would be great. And it looks like this. And what you're going to do is what kind of questions you're going to actually write in. What kind of questions does it ask? Potential methodologies and methods. So you're looking at the type of question on the left-hand side here and the examples of a question. And then I want you to actually think about what kind of questions is it asking? Is it an observation question? Is it a causation question, etc.? Is it a descriptive question? And then what kind of methodology and methods it might actually be using. And again, we know you're new to this, so don't feel like, put down whatever you're thinking, because then we're going to have a chat about it. So let me put you into the breakout rooms. I'm going to stop sharing. Hello, for those of you that have joined since I've put up the slide. It's lovely to see you here. Let's get the breakout rooms going. While I assign people to breakout rooms, does anyone have any questions or comments? Because I promise you I can do 2 things at once. No, you're all quiet today. I hope that means I'm just covering all the stuff in such comprehension that you've got no questions. Okay, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. You're going to do it as a collective, so only one of you really needs to write in the answers. So first thing you need to do when you get into your breakout room is identify who's going to be your scribe, and then go from there. So you should see all of that. Should see a little thing that comes up on your screen that says join breakout room. Shahat and Shivani, are you there? Can you go into your breakout rooms? Hi, Stephanie. Sorry, we're kicking you out. Probably hadn't finished when I jumped in, but that is okay.
Hey, Summer.
Yes.
Can I please point something out?
Sure.
It's not good enough when people have their cameras off and they don't participate. Because in that one, it was literally Ricky and I that did everything, because Danny said at the start that she was just listening, which is understandable.
Yeah.
And the other two sat there, did not say a single word. It's not good enough.
Okay. Yeah. So just for the groups, Danielle has joined us today. She's quite unwell, so I've said that she's more.
Oh
than
no,
welcome.
she
And
said
I'm just telling everybody else, Chloe, because they're
Yeah.
not aware of that. That's all. So
Yeah.
just. So sorry, Danielle, for sharing, but so I have given her permission, because otherwise she wasn't going to be able to be here if it was participated. So Danielle, you don't need to say anything, and I really appreciate you being here, particularly when you are unwell. So thank you very much for coming. I can't remember who else is in your group, Chloe, and I'm not going to name and shame them right now, but it probably is not just your group. So can I please ask that everyone does participate in the groups? It is really important. So part of this practice-based learning is actually peer-to-peer learning, which is what Chloe's talking about, and making sure that we do engage with each other. So
like, I respect Danny for even showing up, and like she even pointed it out to the two people in our group that didn't say a single word.
Yep. And look, yep, I hear you. And so I think I think it's really clear that we want people to participate. It is important that you participate, not just for your own learning, but also to support the learning of your fellow students. So I really, really, really would like you to participate. And as I said right at the beginning, for those that have joined later, please have your cameras on when you're in your group session. I don't mind if it's just me, although I do prefer that if you can have your camera on when you ask a question, that would be greatly appreciated if you're talking to me. But for those of you that do not have your cameras on during the group stuff, that's really not supporting your own learning nor the learning of your fellow students. So we'll just leave it there, Chloe. Thank you for raising that. I do agree with you that it's not best practice.
Thanks, Summer.
Yeah. Okay, so group one, can you share with me, pick one of the questions, and can you share with me what you thought?
Not going to lie, Summer, I have no idea what number group I am.
Okay, so whoever was in Araz's group is group one. I will go through the groups and I'll pick someone out and say they were in. So group one, if you were in Araz's group, please, who was the scribe?
I was.
Right, you don't have to talk unless you would like to talk. We'll pick up someone else in your group. Oh, you actually have to talk because they can't see it. We're not in a classroom situation.
Can I share my screen so we can all talk, or I'm just happy to
just pick one and talk to it, and people can jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, of course. Cool. So for the describing the incidence, prevalence, etc. So the first one, we had the type of question as descriptive. The methodology we decided upon was quantitative, and the potential methods were questionnaires and using like a Likman scale.
Awesome.
For
just one.
Oh, cool, done.
Because we're going to go through the potential methodologies. I've got a cheat sheet here, but I just want to see where everyone's at. Group two, so that was Chloe's group. Who was the scribe?
I was the scribe.
Thanks, Chloe.
So for, might as well continue the list, hey? Exploring a pattern of incidents. We did causal and exploratory, and we did mixed methods.
Yep.
And opinion poll and interview.
Fantastic. Thank you. Group three, who was Lisa's group? Who was the scribe?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you now. Thanks, Lisa.
I think it was Nicole. I think Nicole was the prescriber.
No, you,
Oh,
Nicole?
yeah, I can talk to that. That's fine. Actually, for the first one, the prevalence of work-related physical injuries, we had different to the other group. We had that as an exploratory type of question, and a bit of qualitative, one of the potential methods. And we did have a little bit of a discussion about what does prevalence mean? Is it about purely number, or is it
Yep. So Nicole, you're breaking up.
yeah,
Am I
something more
just asking you-
qualitative? But yeah, the definition.
Can you just turn your camera off? I know I encourage you to turn your camera on, but just because you're breaking up a bit.
Sorry
No,
about that.
don't apologize. It's not your fault.
Okay, quickly say it again. Do you want me to say it again quickly?
Let me just recount what I heard, and then you can fill in the rest if that might. So you were saying you had a difference, your group had a difference of opinion. You had it exploratory, and that you also had it mixed method. So you had qualitative as well, because you had a discussion around what prevalence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, from a research point of view, prevalence is always a number. So it's always about a count. So you will find within the research jargon, there are really specific words that are used in really specific ways that may not necessarily be used in other ways. Like significance is one of them. So for example, when we talk about significance, we're talking about statistically significant. So we're talking about whether or not it's statistically significant. Whereas if we're talking about significance in a more general context, it could be about how important we think something is. So it's just that the jargon has a really prescribed meaning. Right. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And you'll learn this stuff.
Yeah.
The more
And then we.
watch.
Yeah. And then we had data collection for the potential method. It's like going through OH&S incident reports to get number of injuries.
Cool. Fantastic. Thank you very much. That was group 3, wasn't it? So group 4, Nikita's group.
Okay, so I'll talk about the next question.
Yeah.
Which is good. So we decided that it is a explanatory question, and the methodology could be used as mixed methodology, and potential methods were data analysis.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now I am going to share a screen we have all the cheat sheets on it. So, and we can talk through this. Oh, sorry. Need to share my screen. Okay. Can you see just the slide with the types of questions, examples, and potential methodology?
No, we're seeing the notes as well.
Oh, you're seeing my notes as well. Okay, I do this wrong every time, don't I? Rightio. Not that you can't see my notes. I mean, this is all about your learning anyway. So, okay, there we go. You should only be seeing the PowerPoint slide now, unless I'm wrong.
No, that's good.
Okay, lovely. Awesome. So describe the incidence and prevalence. What is the prevalence of work-related physical injuries in disability care workers? That's a quantitative question. Some of the methodologies, and again, you can justify other ones potentially, is a questionnaire of care workers and review of records. I'm going to run through them and then we can have a quick chat if there's any questions about it. So understanding phenomena. So if you could just all mute, that would be fantastic. What are the needs of family members providing palliative care to adults with physical or intellectual disabilities? Quant and qual, so you could do opinion polls, interviews, focus groups with care workers. The third one, exploring a pattern of incidents. What are the work system factors associated with work-related stress for disability care workers working in the community? Quantitative and qualitative, opinion polls, focus groups, etc. Participant observation with care workers. Can I say that's a great question, because it actually looks at what's the phenomenon being looked at, and then you're looking at what the issue is. So the work-related stress for disability care workers, and then it's got the population. So it really clearly outlines the population. I like this question. Work-related stress, so the population being disability workers in the community, as opposed to disability workers potentially in some other setting. Examining associations. Is the health and wellbeing in disability care workers related to their work patterns? So this is about associations, so links between. So it's quantitative and qualitative. Questionnaires, so looking at behaviours. Opinion polls around the perception, so that's how you get the two elements in there. And the focus group interviews with care workers. Improving professional practice. How can manual handling training be improved to meet the needs of casual disability care workers? Quant and qual, so questionnaires with care workers, semi-structured interviews, and participant observation. So with that one, I would actually probably do the semi-structured interviews and the focus groups first with a small number of people, then actually do a questionnaire with a larger group of people to see if it was generalizable. But the participant observation there is actually also then looking at, there's a couple of ways you could do this one, but that actually might be observing whether or not people's perceptions is correct, or your interpretation of people's perceptions is correct. So the next one's testing theory and hypothesis. Does a 2-day intensive course on manual handling predict model improve it's really badly phrased, it's compliance among workers providing disability care? So quantitative. Questionnaire, systematic observation, before and after test. So this will be a pre and post. Intervention study, so naturalistic. Does a 5-minute mindfulness meditation improve self-reported ratings of well-being for workers providing disability care? Quantitative and qual. So you get them to do the intervention, you do it pre, you do a poll pre, so get them to rate their well-being, get them to do the 5-minute mindfulness, and then you rate it afterwards. So you might get them to do the mindfulness for 5 minutes across a week, and you look at whether or not that makes a difference. And the quantitative of that will be, do people do it? So the count, so people only did it for 5 minutes for a week versus the month or whatever. Intervention study is experimental. Does a monthly risk analysis tool reduce self-reported physical injury amongst disability care workers compared to those with no risk analysis tool? So you've got standard, which is no risk analysis tool, and the new intervention, and you're doing quantitative. So you're looking at review and questionnaires, review of injury reports, and so before and after intervention. So any questions or comments on that? I have another question for you. Everyone happy to go for a 10-minute break? Yeah, 10-minute break. So come back at 12, everyone, please.
Thank you.
Summer?
Yes, who was that?
Oh, I just popped, it's Nicole. I just popped it in the chat. Are you going to share that cheat sheet with us?
Yes, I can. I will. I will put it in your resources for week 2 under the workshop 2.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a good tool, that.
Yeah, it is a good tool.
Thank you.
Do that now.
Summer?
Yes, who was that? Sorry.
Yeah. So actually, I was not able to attend the first few minutes of the lecture. So I don't want to miss anything. So will us be getting the recording of this tutorial? to get
Yes.
me started.
It
Because
is.
you know the
It's absolutely.
international difference. Actually, it was 4 in the morning here in my country. Yeah.
Appreciate that that is a challenging time to get up. So yes, we will, the recording is going to be made available. So we have 5 people at the same time doing the workshops. We only make one available. So if you want mine, I think Patty's going to put hers up this week, but if you want mine specifically, I can share that with you. Otherwise, just have a look at the one that's online.
Okay, okay. And then about the attendance, then how will it be calculated? I mean, because I attended late, so basically I was not there in the beginning.
I haven't. It's fine. You're noted now. So thank you for coming.
Okay. Thank you.
Not a problem. Hi, Danielle. I hope that didn't make you uncomfortable, that conversation.
No, that was fine.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to need people to 1 minute past in case their clocks are slightly wrong. And then we'll kick off because we're actually behind time as per usual because we had some really good conversation. The next activity is just going to be a activity for yourself. So you're just going to take 5 minutes to have a think about what we've just learned and what it means for your all right, and we're going to use Padlet again. So for those that are joining us, get your Padlet up. Oh, actually, I'm going to put it in the chat. So let me put the link in the chat. My apologies. That's what I've got to do. Okay, if everyone can open their Padlets, that would be great. And I'm also going to put in the chat the questions. So there we go. So for the next 5 minutes, so till 12:07, I just want you to open up the Padlet and then I want you to answer each of the questions that's in the Padlet. So if you're having trouble with Padlet, that's why I've put it here in case, so you can just write them down. Although I prefer to use the Padlet if you can. What is your research question? What type of research question is it? What would be an appropriate approach? So method. Appropriate approach. So whether it's a descriptive, etc. Then what are the next steps to find a method? So till 12:07, if you could just do that individual activity, that'd be great. Sorry, I didn't realize I had my camera off still.
Summer, can I ask a question? It's Nicole.
Sure.
With that, what type of research question is it? Is it usually just those 4 categories?
So which 4 categories are you referring to?
Descriptive, exploratory, explanatory.
No,
causal.
there's a whole bunch more. So if you're finding that yours is outside of those, so we've just given you some. There's more in the modules.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking, oh, that'd be nice if there's only 4. But
yeah, it would be, but unfortunately not.
no, that's fine. Thank you.
So I can see on the screen that there's a couple of people that have answered question 3 who are anonymous. I have no idea who you are. Please don't post anonymously. That makes my life very difficult. So to not post anonymously, you need to have an account, which we can talk about. And I can only see a few. No one's put in anything in what type of research question is it so far? All right. The time has come. So that was just an exercise for a 5-minute exercise. I can't see very many people's on here, and there may be a delay, but I can only see one person now 2 people who have put in the first question. What is your research question?
There's a lot more than I think it must.
Yeah, there's a lot more
Yeah,
on my
you're
side.
significantly delayed.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I've just refreshed it. Oh, no, sorry. I hadn't scrolled down. My apologies. There is a lot more. Thank you. And thank you for putting your name on it if you're in there as anonymous. That was a brilliant idea. Fantastic. Does anyone want to talk about theirs? I'd like 2 people to talk about theirs.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about mine just because I'm still a bit confused. So yeah, so my research question is, how does being the Australian-born child of immigrants impact the development and experience of said youth and adolescents in southwestern Sydney?
Can we break it down little bit by little bit, and I can give you some?
Of course. Yep. Yeah, please.
Really good question in a number of ways. So you've got your phenomena that you're looking at, so the impact of development, and you've got your participants that you're looking at, which is Australian-born children of immigrants, and you've also got your you've kind of put a bit of geography around it to make it a much more achievable research. But also when you put the geography around it, you've got people in a similar type of setting, as opposed to looking in multiple settings, which then might have other variations which you can't account for. So the question is fantastic in those regards. I think so. When you're doing a research proposal, what you do after you write a research question is often write your objectives, which is then how you would outline the more details, because you can't say everything in a question, right? You give the broad brush strokes. Development and experience. So they're 2 things, and they're different things. So you may want to consider, and you don't have to, having one or the other to make it much more straightforward, because you'll have to have multiple methods to answer the different approaches. So for development, for example, you might want to actually do a data linkage project, which is where you actually link, say, Medicare. So you link, say, hospital to other kind of health outcomes through the juvenile justice system or in out-of-home care, as well as a whole bunch of things. That's a really big project. So that's how you get quant data. So you'd say, oh, this person, you know, but experience. And what do you mean by experience would be my question.
So after this lecture, I feel as though interviews may be a way that I would go about it, and that when I say experience, I mean like their or like adolescents take or their kind of responses to what growing up in Australia was like, being Australian born but with immigrant parents and having like that culture clash, and how they may have experienced kind of growing up with these two worlds almost, maybe.
Yeah, so that's definitely, so I'd say development and experience are two really separate questions, because when we talk about development, we're talking about obviously physical, social, emotional development from a clinical perspective usually. So I would highly encourage you to think about doing one of those, and interviews is a great idea for that.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share their research question and then talk about something else?
I don't mind sharing mine.
Thanks, Madison.
Mine is restorative justice an appropriate framework to deal to address the trauma experienced by female victims of sexual assault?
Fantastic. And tell me more about how you're going to do that.
So I wanted to do also probably a questionnaire sort of thing, but I was actually looking into doing, because so many stories of sexual assault are already out there and like established. So instead of going through the possible re-traumatization of directly talking to victims, I could use their pre-established stories online as a sort of like almost like a data review.
You could. What would be some of the limitations of doing that?
Some of the limitations are definitely because they are not, I'm not asking the questions, I'm not getting the answers I want. But a lot of them talk about the trauma that they experience in the current criminal justice system. So then I can make an educated estimate of how restorative justice would be able to help these women.
Yep. So something you could also do, so you could interview people. So we could talk about how you might want to do that in the sensitive way that it would not, it reduces the likelihood because you can't fully mitigate risks.
Yeah.
You could potentially also talk to workers who work in the restorative justice space to get their perceptions on this particular question.
I did mention that in my assignment that I would love to work.
Which I haven't read yet, so sorry.
No, sorry, I'm very sorry. But I just want to say that I had thought about this. That I wanted to talk with social workers on cases within the realms of their confidentiality.
Yeah, and so what's the limitation of doing that?
A limitation of doing that is obviously I'm not speaking directly to a victim, so an outside perspective can never fully understand the experience of these women, but their close relationship to the experience would be like a huge amount of resource to draw from.
Yeah, and you can justify at times, depending on the circumstances, speaking to someone else about another person. So say it's a child, or you are looking to not wanting to traumatize. You could potentially talk to women that have gone through this process. And the reason why I say that is, and you would want to do a number of things around it. So you potentially might not do the interview. You might get a psychologist or a social worker to do the interview to be able to think about this sensitively. So therefore you're not doing it. Sorry, someone's just turned up at my house that I didn't know was coming. I can hear him in the background. And so you could actually, depending on what your background is, you could do it yourself, and you would then have opportunities for people to stop at different times. You would actually make sure that you had counselors available to speak to people afterwards. They might want to have a support person in the room with them. So there's lots of ways you can reduce the risk of further traumatizing someone to the point of it being detrimental. So I think there's lots of things you can think about with topics that are really sensitive but really important to actually explore.
Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else want to have a chat?
I'd like to. So my question, which I'm aware is probably still too big, and every day I feel like I'm trying to just chisel it down a bit more, is something around how are transgender youth and adults in Australia receiving information about fertility, reproductive rights, and antenatal care, and how does their interaction with these different knowledge providers influence their decisions around having babies? So I'm trying to identify what are the different streams, what are the different channels from where people are getting their information from, and based on what those channels are for the individual, how is that affecting the outcome on whether they go down these paths or not?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things about your question. Again, it's really good that you've got a cohort, that you've got a population that you're looking at. It's transgender youth, so that's quite nice. It's smaller than say just transgender generally, because
I did say youth and adults, but
oh right,
sorry, but so that's a good point that you brought up, because I did first I had just youth, and then I realized that what I was actually talking about was people who are new to medical transition, and that might actually happen for adults as well as youth. So it's more about for people who are entering the beginning phases of the medical part of transition. Those are the people that we're talking about, and they could be 16 or they could be 65.
Yeah.
Well, probably not 65 because it wouldn't be as relevant anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe
Yeah, maybe. Science is cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would look at actually reframing your question to include that. So that brings down your scope a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd say is I think you actually need to keep it at Australia, because I am not as familiar with this space as you probably are by the sense of it, but I'm going to make an assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's still, even at an Australian level, it's a reasonably small population.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. But part of, I guess, the interesting thing that we're figuring out is how, yeah, there's so many bits of this. It's really hard for me to decide which are the bits that will have the most data, but part of underreporting is a big issue because the systems don't allow for reporting. And so so it's a bit difficult to even really know what the numbers are. Like we can say, like, according to Medicare, I think something like 65 men had babies last year in Australia, but that's just according to Medicare data of who's gone through the right tick boxes to be seen as such. So
yes.
Yeah.
So all I'm meant to say is that you wouldn't want to say reduce your study to the Illawarra, because you might have one or two people, which is then not going to be a large enough sample size to draw any conclusion. So I think I would normally discourage people from doing a whole of
I understand. Yep.
But yours is probably best. You're talking about sexual and reproductive stuff here, so that's all within the same realm. So you're not looking at two disparate type of phenomena. And the knowledge providers, I think it's a large question, but I actually, for a change, do not believe it's actually too large.
Yeah.
Because you've got some challenges around it because your population's so small.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm deliberately trying to now keep it all in the realm of big, whereas before it was some in the realm of big as well as in the realm of granular. So I've gotten rid of the granular stuff and actually just kind of decided to just keep it at that broad level, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So that's why it's about knowledge systems now instead of what it was before.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that if you do go into research, you're going to have a career in research, so you don't have to answer everything in all in one question or research project. So you need to think about a what we call it, a platform of research where you're actually going to think about a number of different things from a number of different angles. So that's great. Now we have 20 minutes left. We're going to do a very, very quick on a piece of paper. Has everyone got paper in front of them? Have access to paper? If not, you can, create a Padlet. Just a 5-minute brainstorm, because this is an activity that I would like you to continue once you've actually, thinking about assessments 3 and 4. I've just put it in the chat. Place your research question in the center of the page, and then just start actually drawing lines out. What type of data you collect? I'm going to show you an example on the screen. So let me share my screen, and I will attempt to get it right the first time. Give me one sec. And look, if it's got don't know what you're seeing. You're seeing my notes as well?
Yes, we are. Yep.
Don't worry about it. You can see my notes. It's for you guys anyway. So this is an example of what I'm talking about. So this will help you with assessments 3 and 4. So I'm just going to give you 5 minutes quickly, and then we'll wrap up. Don't know if that was quite 2 minutes, guys, but we'll come back. So that's an exercise that you can do to help you thinking about your research project and moving towards assessment 3 and 4. So I'm just wondering if anyone wants to share what was probably the most significant take-home message for them today. Mary? Yeah, I'm going to pick on you.
It's okay, no problem. Okay, for me, I think as I move towards my projects, more things are more clear, especially the difference between the qualitative and quantitative, the methods and the methodologies, and the exercise that we've just done, because some questions have actually cropped up, which actually relate to my research questions for the assessment that I already submitted. I think I need to have a look at it before I move forward.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
is the idea, by the way, with the assessments. They're all linked because we know that research is iterative, it's circular. Sometimes you take a step forward and you take a step back. So we don't expect it to be a straightforward process. What we're looking for in assessment 3 is actually that learning. So that learning is just as important as the actual research question itself. So that's really good. Thanks, Mary. But Cash, what was your probably take home from today?
I think we need to really look at how to collect data and use the significant methods of like you all doing the methods and methodologies. Like you talk about the interviews and the like scale questions and those kind of things. So really need to focus on the research question and how we can achieve the data that is effective to the research questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Shahat, what was your take-home message? I assume they're not there. Ricky.
Yes, I am here.
No. I was just going to ask you what your take-home message was.
I think I still dislike data. I do prefer qualitative study and ethnographic study. I think it's more ethical, and I do like the take on the module 3 where Dr. Duncan was talking about collaborative research method, where you can develop your research topic with your research subjects. And I think that's a really relational and kind of individual focused kind of research method, rather than just like treating people as objects and the representation of the law or rule of word. Yeah.
Ricky, you and I think alike. I actually do collaborative research. That is my whole research bag, whether it's qual or quant. I do prefer qual personally. I do quant because I see it as it's a means to an end for me, but it's not my love. My love will always be qualitative. So you may find you need to do a little bit of quant, but you're welcome to fall in love with qual. I absolutely understand that. Fantastic. So just so I'm not actually keeping you any later, does anyone have any quick questions before we go?
Can I keep you for an extra minute? I don't want to waste everyone's time, please.
Yep, I've got another student who wants to have a chat to me too.
Okay.
So if it's a personal question,
No.
no, okay, fantastic. Next steps, keep doing the modules. Make sure you try and do them within the week that you can, guys, because if you get behind, it's really hard to catch up. Although, do note, in week 7, there is 0 modules for you. So you do have some time to catch up in week 7, and that's intentional. Also, you have assessment 2 coming up. I think it's in week 7, unless I'm wrong. That is the UOW ethics training. What you need to do is do the training online, then you upload your certificate. They'll produce a certificate at the end to say that you've done the training. And basically it's a pass or fail. And the only way you fail is by not doing it. So this is a really easy one to get you 10 marks. Any other final questions?
Just wanted to
Can I
ask
a question?
Oops, sorry, Lisa first, and then I'm not sure who the other person was, and then Ben.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Lisa.
Can you? Yeah, with the assessment question, the asset training online, are you going to put a link up for us to be able to do that online asset training?
Yes, we will do that. Thank you for pointing that out. That is something that I had failed to do. So thank you very much for pointing that out, Lisa.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Who else had a quick question? And I'm asking for quick questions. It was another woman, I thought. Nicole.
Yeah,
Sorry, Nicole.
Hi. Just quickly, where were you going to upload that cheat sheet to? Is it
I'm going to put it on, I put it into a Word document. I haven't uploaded it yet. So I'm going to put it into the workshop 2 resources.
Okay.
Which is under workshop 2. That made sense to me. If there's a more logical place for it, please let me know.
Thank you.
Ben, did you have a quick question?
I don't know if it's quick, but I wanted to actually talk to you one-on-one about the feedback on my research question for the critical reflection, and just make sure I'm understanding it correctly. because I'm starting to feel a little bit nervous about whether I'm on the right track or not.
Rightio. Let me review yours. So I'm going to give you feedback on your assessment, and that's probably the first point. Let me mark your assessment, and then maybe we can have a chat, or do you want to have a chat first?
I don't mind. I just know time is against all of us, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to do whatever you suggest.
Okay. Hang on the line, Ben, if you've got time now, and I'll answer the other two questions because I don't think they're personal questions, and then maybe we can have a chat.
Okay, great.
Sorry, is there more questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask the one quick question, sir. So you already mentioned that you'll be uploading the link to that ethics assessment, which is for 10 marks in the resource module, right? Week 2 tutorial resources.
Sorry, can you say that again for me, Nikita?
Which link were you going to upload in tutorial resources?
Oh no, so in the tutorial in the workshop 2 resources, I'm going. Sorry, the workshop 2. So sorry, the link that I'm uploading, well, I'm not uploading, that I'm adding to the Moodle, which will be under assessment 2, is the link to the UOW ethics training, which is what you're required to do for assessment 2.
Okay, the link. Okay,
no problem.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyone else got any questions? Because if you don't have a question, you're more than welcome to leave. Not that I don't like seeing all your faces, but it does. Thanks, Danielle. Hope you're feeling so much better. Thanks, Madison, for today. Thanks, Ricky. Great having you on board today.
See you guys.
See you. We'll see you next. Oh, in a fortnight. Yep. Thank you for today. Lisa, see you. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Mary, start with your question.
When I was submitting my assessment, remember there's that front page, the cover page of the assessment, which I used. However, when I submitted my assessment, I noticed the similarities it's way above, and I realized it's because of the front page. Is that a problem?
No, it is absolutely not a problem. I didn't realize that there was a cover sheet, so I've taken this subject over and I missed that. I normally wouldn't have a cover sheet because it's a pain when it comes to similarity.
Yeah.
It's confusing. You will absolutely not be penalized if the cover sheet is the reason for your similarity. The other reason for similarity is often references, because the citation is everywhere. It's going to be so look, if your similarity is purely just the cover sheet and the referencing, please don't worry.
So should we keep doing the cover sheet for the next assessments?
I'm going to take them off.
Thank you.
Confusing and annoying and frustrating for everybody. So as I said, I haven't seen a cover sheet since you had to submit assessments in person and there was no such thing as Turnitin. I have no idea why that's a legacy on this subject.
Okay.
So apologies.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya. Stephanie, you're still here, so I assume you've got a quick non-personal question.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what defines non-personal.
Well, I mean, something you don't mind sharing that is slightly broader group.
I do, but mine's not as quick, maybe a minute or two. So I don't know if anyone's is quicker, so I don't take up anyone else's time. But I was going to ask a question about my research project, if that's okay.
Okay. Nikita, I notice you're still here. Do you have a quick question, or are you just here?
No, I don't have any question.
Okay, good-o. Stephanie, let's start with your question and I will try and be quick. And if it's not quick, we might need to make another time if it's something that I can answer.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm doing the research project at the same time as this subject.
Yes, I did know that, I think.
In the interest of life. So at the moment, I've got my topic is 4Ds, which is a learning tool. It's a tool of doing a sort of risk discussion. It's basically a learning team. It's pretty new to the industry, and I have the privilege of being able to use my workplace because they're currently going through all this sort of stuff at the moment, which is great. Yeah. I'm a bit stuck because I do have to submit in 4 weeks for that project around my methodology, and how I'm going to go about collecting this information. And I am sort of trying to spitball the best way to not make this bigger than Ben-Hur, because I don't want to do too much quant stuff. but I'm probably going to have some quant stuff. So I did drop a couple of ideas into that last exercise. Semi-structured interviews would be better for me because they'd be easier.
Yeah. So the challenge that we have is that your critical reflection forum in week 3, which I'm noticing you didn't use, would have been the time to ask this. Did you? Oh, no, hang on. My apologies. Stephanie, you did. My apologies. I was looking at the wrong column. No. Sorry. I think some of the things that you're asking me are for assessment 3, really, for this subject. So I really can't actually, you really need, you probably need to go to your other placement subject coordinator to be able to do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of jumping ahead too far for this subject.
Yeah, that's the drama. So the way that they've structured both units, a lot of people do them side by side, but they're all due at the wrong times. So I haven't been through obviously the data stuff here yet. And then they wanted me to have submitted that last week. So it just doesn't quite work out. So I don't know really where to go. I mean, I keep talking to my research supervisor, but I just kind of wanted to spitball because my research supervisor is not a researcher.
Okay. I'm going to ask, I think you and I are going to have a separate conversation. Can you email me? Because I'm got a brain like mush after these workshops. And just actually we'll set up a consultation.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, just want to spitball, nothing in particular, but just sort of.
Yeah, I just have to be careful because I'm not actually I'm not able to give everybody kind of intense one-on-one support for all of their research projects, but I want to talk about the difficulties you're having with the 2 subjects.
Yeah,
okay. Thanks, Stephanie. Ben, now we've got Bakash and Ben here next. Now, Ben, is yours no, okay, let's go with yours first.
Okay, it was just the feedback on the critical reflection post that I did on my research question, because I'm starting to concern myself with whether I'm actually in the right ballpark or not. And I'm worried as to how that will affect further assessments, basically. So I don't want to go down rabbit holes and waste time working on a research question that's kind of not A-okay. So, and I just love the research area because of my exposure in my placement in terms of homelessness, and I'm learning a lot about the process of applying for temporary accommodation and working with clients in a support worker role. So I'm just interested in kind of focusing on that. My question was like, should I be restricting this geographically to the Illawarra region in my question to make it a little bit more manageable? You kind of talked about in your feedback about
looking at it now. So let's just break it down, just so I can answer one at a time. Otherwise, I'm going to get lost. No, that's right. So I think some of the feedback I gave you was that I didn't feel like your question was going to answer what you wanted to. So the what was what you had in. So your experiences led to great appreciation. So it sounded like you wanted to do an evaluation.
I sort of do, but I don't. I'm not being flippant. I don't really care. I think the amount of information that I can get from my research, like as we said, we develop a kind of a question, but I might go into a completely different area once I start getting some of that as it evolves. So I'm more interested in understanding what the barriers are for people experiencing homelessness to move out of homelessness. And I'm using the conduit of that process of Link to Home, which is a government funded initiative, to get them out of that.
So I'm going to be honest, your question is fantastic. My only concern was what you put in the what didn't quite connect with your question.
Okay.
So if your question is going to stay as that is an absolutely fantastic question in the sense that you've got your population, which is the homeless, using Link to Home. So you've got a very discrete population and you're looking at a very manageable phenomena, which is barriers.
Yes. Yeah.
So your question, and my only concern was, you said a couple of different things in the what that didn't quite connect
with it. Okay.
And it may be that what you did, and so this was a really short reflection, was that you started out big and you ended up funneling down. So it meant that, So look, the question in and of itself is fine.
Okay, great. Okay, that's it.
No, you did say there was nothing else you wanted to check with me?
No, that's good. I'm happy with that. I feel a lot better.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Have a good weekend.
Bye. You too.
Bakash, let's turn to you.
Yes. Can you stop the recording?
Oh, yes, I can. Sorry, I forgot I was still recording. Thank you.